Today we're going to have a great case study. I think it's exciting for you to hear from the team of folks involved in using Drupal 8 to provide a platform for more than 195 websites for the Fairfax County public school system. And whether you are, running a web ecosystem for a school system with 195 sites, or your organization has 19 websites or 5 websites, I think the insights and the approach here will be relevant for you about running a system with a lot of sites with a whole ecosystem. Before we dive in, we'd like to learn a little bit more about who's here and why you're here. So let me ask just a couple of questions and have a quick show of hands. Is there anyone here who actually works with a school system, whether secondary or higher education? There's one person. Okay, great. How many of you are employed with a government agency? Good number of you. How many of you are responsible for a whole suite, a multiple set of websites? About the same number of you. How many of you would call yourselves more of a technical person? You're doing coding, or you're working with coders versus you're more of a site manager? Coder, technical person. Okay, more of a site manager, communications manager. Okay, a few of you as well. Excellent. Let me ask a couple of you to say why'd you come to this session? What do you hope to get out of it? What questions might you have? Anyone want to be bold and shout something out?
Well, we with Ligotech, Jim Meyer, and we actually help perform your translation. So, in case you delved into that or any questions.
Great. Okay.
I mean, well, we're in the beginning phase of transitioning to Drupal 8, so just curious to see what their experience has been. I also live in Fairfax.
Great.
About that.
You got some hometown connection there. Excellent. Any other question or kind of what you hope to learn out of this session? Anyone else want to offer it up? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Tony Morris. I saw your other demo at the DrupalCon, by the way, with Indian Affairs.
Yep.
Indian Affairs. So we also work with the Bureau of Indian Education. So they have a multitude of schools, tribal schools that they support. So we're just trying to get some information, just more insight on your great efforts. Fairfax County.
Great. Well, let's dive in a little bit. Again, I'm Chris Wolves. I'm with Forum One. We're the digital agency that work with Fairfax County in designing and launching this suite of sites for them, and have experience working with Drupal 8 with a lot of other organizations as well. The Fairfax County Public Schools, Nancy will say a few more words about it. It's a huge organization, 190,000 or so students, 23,000 employees. It's a small city by itself. Fairfax County has more buses than the Greyhound Bus Company, which I find noteworthy and amazing. And so you can imagine how important having a good, clear system of communicating across this whole community would be. The vision for the new Fairfax County Public website was really to be the main digital way that the school system communicates with students, parents, and employees. Improve the quality of the experience online, improve the consistency of it, the way it looks and feels, and the efficiency of managing this. They started about 2 years ago approaching this project and got in touch with us and worked with them to set up and bring up this platform on Drupal 8, and we'll explain a little bit more about why the choice to go with Drupal 8 and what the experience has been. And we hope this to be a pretty candid conversation about what was learned, pros and cons, and how we got this set up. Again, so this platform could be the main way that parents and others will communicate with Fairfax County. And Nancy was saying to me just this morning, she doesn't think it's going to take until 2020. She thinks it's already the main way that the schools and parents communicate with each other, including through mobile devices, which we'll hear more about, a key priority for the project. I'm excited to have on the panel here and we'll have each of them say a few words, and then we mainly hope to have questions from you and have a discussion with all of you, so keep those in mind. Nancy Moy from Fairfax County Public Schools, to my right here, has been the main leader for the project for the Fairfax County Public Schools, and she's with the Department of Communications and Community Relations. To her right is Chaz Chumley, one of my colleagues at Forum 1. Chaz is one of our senior technology managers and does a lot of work with Drupal, front-end development, back-end development as well, and has been in a lead role on this project. And also real excited to have Matt Cheney here from San Francisco with Pantheon. Matt is one of the co-founders and one of the leaders of Pantheon, which provided the platform that is supporting the schools. So let me start off with you, Nancy, and ask if you could give a little intro to where things stood in 3 years ago when you were thinking to start this project, and why did this become a priority, and how?
So Fairfax County Public Schools has had a website since about 2000, like most school districts have. We were operating on Unix with Sun Solaris platform, using Dreamweaver with HTML, and that was pretty much the capacity of that server. The authentication was not great. People would just pass their ID and password on to the next person and they came along. And everything was sort of patched together. We needed some more dynamic content, so we patched together some Cold Fusion applications using SQL. We needed some interactive web forms, so we would use Google Forms or SurveyMonkey for those type of things. So it was very a patchwork of technology. And when we decided to go with content management system, we discovered that most of the school districts in the country of our size or larger were already on their second or maybe third content management system. So we were looking into a long-term solution. We didn't want to be tied into a licensed product that might get purchased by someone like Blackboard and then disappear. So we've seen that happen to some other school districts where then they had to migrate their content from one to the other, which seemed to be troublesome.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Oh, a couple other things that were the state of the website at the time. Our number one page on our Web Trends report was the 404 page. That didn't really get us any compliments at all. The search function was terrible because people would put up pages and never take them down, and the search engine was not really functioning. The design was inconsistent. From school to school, you could see which schools had devoted time and effort to their website and which schools didn't have the staff or resources for that. And the way that the authentication was set up, you could only have one ID and password per school. So it was pretty much reliant on this one person to do any updates to the website at all. They sort of came up with some creative solutions, like they would embed their principal's Twitter feed, and then that would appear on their home page as an announcement. So they figured out a couple different ways to try to make things more easier for them to keep things up to date and consistent. But it was not a great solution. It was not mobile friendly. Yeah, it was not a lot of things. So we needed to make a change at the time.
Great. Yeah, and shown here are, Nancy referred to, are some of the key goals that they had when they set out to tackle this project. Could you say a little bit about, and then turn to Chaz and have him address this some as well, complicated trying to impose some standards, some consistency across a collection of schools that have been used to kind of having it their own way?
We had representation from about 15 schools in the initial design committee, and we would get together with designers from Form 1 and go over what the possibilities were, and there was a lot of back and forth, and we feel like we got buy-in at that point from the 15 schools that were represented, and then they sort of gave their co-workers the same information that this was going to be an improvement and that they should get on board. The color choices were not popular because, you know, the school has had the colors of purple and yellow for 25 years and all their uniforms are purple and yellow, but the contrast isn't enough for Section 508 compliance. So, but once you explain things to people in those terms, they tend to go along with the right thing.
Excellent. Chaz, could you say a little bit about the architecting of the site, front end and back end as well?
Yeah, so one of the challenges that Nancy talked about was having a consistent branding and messaging across all of the different school sites. And so when we sat down with our designer, Daniel Farrow, and started coming up with the color palettes, making sure that there was enough color contrast ratio with accessibility, we need to really think about a way to be able to implement that in an easy way for the schools to be able to maintain that consistent message and branding and color scheme. And so, unlike Drupal 7, where you're designing pages, we really tackled Drupal 8 and FCPS as a design system. And so, being able to utilize an install profile, which we'll get more into detail on, was able to maintain the structure and the layouts from school to school, but then giving the ability for them to choose a primary and secondary color that actually was 508 accessible, as well as being able to upload their logo, and so that each school could have a independent presence but still maintain the branding and marketing across FTPS was one of the main goals when we actually started architecting the site.
A key part of building out the site was really allowing each school to have their own content, flexibility and control there, but also having a structured approach to school-wide content. And could you say a little bit about the content syndication approach?
Yeah, so a lot of times when you're thinking of, I have multiple Drupal instances I need to maintain, especially depending on how long you've been doing a type of Drupal development or working with Drupal, probably the first thing that pops in your head is multi-site. However, multi-site brings with it a lot of challenges: single source point of failure, the ability for one site to be able to take down all the sites if they inject some invalid PHP or configuration. And so we knew that wasn't the approach that we wanted to take. We wanted to take more of a microsite approach, which is a best practice approach to handling Drupal, especially Drupal 8. And so this gave us the ability to develop a single school site, taking into consideration all of the challenges and the requirements that need to be put into place, and then develop an installation profile off of that. So we had this install profile that we could then put on the Pantheon platform and turn into an upstream to where we could actually distribute a single instance with all the configuration, with all the front-end architecture, with all the back-end architecture, and easily deploy this with a push of a button, so that in this case of 195 schools, as we wanted to bring different schools online, it was a matter of just training them on actually how to technically push the button, configure the site with their branding colors. And so following this kind of upstream code propagation with a repository and pushing things down is very flexible, because number one, it allows for each site to be consistent. But since each site is actually technically its own Drupal instance, down the line, if a school, heaven forbid, does want to change something without the other schools changing it, they do have the flexibility of doing so, and we can manage that with configuration very easily.
Matt, I'd be interested to hear from you a little bit about technically what's going on behind the scenes to make this easy, make this possible, make this work across such a large set of schools.
Yeah, I mean, one of the unique challenges for a project like this is that instead of just having one website that needs to have some servers and some back-end configuration to make it work, you have 185, 195 kind of sites and a growing number that all sort of need their own web servers, their own PHP processes, their own file systems, their own databases, all set up and appropriately secured and configured, not only to have those sites online, but to have testing environments for each of those sites. And one of the things sort of we do at Pantheon and other folks sort of can do using sort of container technology, which is a more modern sort of way of doing sort of virtual machines and really having very small components be sort of assembled for each site, is that you can approach a project like this for Fairfax County and say, look, we need to have several hundred sites. So we're going to deploy sort of scripts to create, individual microsites, each of them set up with their own independent resources, their own independent code bases, their own independent file systems. And they can all still inherit the kind of upstream code Chaz was talking about. So they're still sharing work in the sense that they're using the same code base. But they have that flexibility to customize each of their individual sites, which increasingly becomes sort of part of these projects. But also that you have very strong separations of concerns, that each of these sites is running in their own sort of memory chunk in the cloud. Each of these sites has their own sort of security wall around what they're doing, and each of these own sites has their own resources. So that when you do have traffic events or security events, things are going to be very isolated and very protected on an individual site basis. Some of the approaches we've seen that don't work out so well when you try to sort of jam all of the sites into one mega site, where you sort of are having all of the sites sharing the same security concerns and shared performance concerns, and you run into real concerns when you're trying to like customize one piece of this larger big behemoth kind of site. Things can become very brittle and can break very easily. And I think one of the sort of wins with this project is being able to sort of use on the front end design system, like I was talking about, to have very componentized pieces of the site. And then on the server side, having componentized parts of the server, so you can have that flexibility, but still sort of share work and have good efficiency gains.
Great. Let me turn and turn to questions that folks might have and see what would be of interest. Yes?
So in terms of DevOps...
we'll get a couple questions out, so go ahead.
In terms of DevOps, just to support like deployment releases and all these environments, every school has their own DevOps team, or is that more centralized, or how does that just the support of during releases at all of these?
They have one DevOps team. His name's Mitch.
Okay.
And a fleet of robots to help.
So you guys all centralize your releases basically for all the different...
Yeah, so still probably the biggest question is, okay, now I have 195 school sites. What happens when Drupal has a security update? How do I then propagate that out? Am I having to go individually to each site and update it and go through that lengthy process? The answer is no. The Pantheon platform has a command line tool called Terminus, which allows us to script out the pushing of those updates. So it's a matter of just scripting it for the one site, testing it. It's fine. I push it to the upstream, Terminus, run a command. Now I sit there and live through all the 195 sites pushing it out. I'm not having to worry about going one by one through either command line, or I'm not having to worry about going one through an admin UI to be able to manage those. And so it makes it much easier. There's an example of a screenshot of the Pantheon platform. Matt can talk more about that.
Yeah, this is sort of the control panel for all 195 sites that are sort of running on the platform. Each of the names of the sites sort of links to a full dashboard where you can, download backups or initiate code pushes or create testing environments for each site. But this overall dashboard allows you to sort of filter sites that have updates to review, sites that are launched or not launched depending on your sort of tagging structure. And then as sort of administrators, you can log in and sort of see the whole overview of your entire sort of fleet of websites. And that's sort of, as Chaz was talking about, updates then become sort of running a script or pushing a button. And those behind the scenes sort of robot-like scripts will go ahead and actually do those updates, push them to the testing environment for review, and then you click through. But the important thing is that because each of these sites are sort of microsites and separated, you can sort of manage individual updates on a per site basis. You don't have to just sort of update all of them and hope it all works all at once. You can sort of go site by site to make sure everything works appropriately, do your testing, and do your deployment, but have that process be a sane and relatively quick one for the folks who are managing the sites.
Question in front?
Sure. So I was wondering how you move the content between one microsite to another as a user or as a host.
So from a content syndication standpoint, we're really not moving content from school site to school site. We're pushing content from the central site down to the school site. So more kind of a hub-spoke model. The screenshot there is a perfect example of this. And so we have news, blog, events, calendar updates, and then even alerts where, for instance, if all Fairfax County public schools are out because of a snow day, the central office has the ability to create that alert, and then that alert is sent out via an RSS feed, and there's a JavaScript listener on the school sites that listens for any type of alerts and then broadcasts that message on the school sites. The alerts also have the ability to, which is very cool, is to target individual schools. So, heaven forbid, let's say there's an incident at a school where the bomb threat is a common one, unfortunately, nowadays. And so, to be able to send out an alert to that particular school that's taking place, so that the parents, maybe on their mobile device, can be able to see, oh, this is what's going on, versus waiting, an hour for that robocall that comes from the school. I don't know that the school's on a lockdown. And so this syndication model works very well because it allows for the central office and the communication staff to be able to manage the messaging that goes out to the schools. So things that are global in nature are propagated out. Some things that are school specific go to each of those individual schools.
Great. Question here.
How does search work? So I presume each site has its own search.
Yep.
What about, how does it integrate with the parent?
So the question is about search and how it integrates with the parent.
Yep. So there wasn't a need for school sites to be able to search the central site because of the fact that we were pushing the content from the central site that was important for all the schools to the individual school sites. So if I was on a school site and I wanted to search, I'm just using the Drupal search mechanism there. One of the challenges though that I'd like to bring up with search on any platform, and Pantheon really worked with us on this one, is when you're dealing with a container-based architecture and you're dealing with something like Solar and you go to create an index, you need to be very cognitive of what container you're inside of. For instance, if I go to run a Solar index and I have 5 containers for, in this case, the central site running, and I go to do a search, and I'm going to get 5 different search results if I'm not knowing that, hey, I need all 5 containers to run that same index. And that's something that we discovered early on as being early adopters of Drupal 8. And it was something that Pantheon, very responsive, and one of the reasons we partnered with them, because they're always looking at how to improve the platform. So any challenges that we run into, you guys reap the benefits of them.
Let me ask a question of Nancy. Shifting 190 some schools and however they've been managing their sites, however they've been managing their content, shifting them to a different approach, and they haven't all shifted, you're doing it incrementally. Organizationally, that's complicated. What's the experience been in terms of making the organizational change happen? How's that gone? What have you done that has been effective? And have you had any problems or any pushback?
Well, we had originally incorporated these 15 pilot schools into the process. Their principals, the principals basically in charge of everything that happens at their school, including their website. So we made sure the principals were aware that this was happening, and brought them all into meetings and discussed how it was going to work. And so they were, most of them were very, looking forward to the change and the efficiency of the process. And the other thing that they were looking forward to was getting the person who was working on their website, who was really either supposed to be teaching the children or working in the library or teaching music or something else besides working on the website. So they were all on board with that once we explained how the duties of the web person would change, where they would have less to do and they could delegate some of the responsibilities to other people. So they were on board for that. But we had some central office political issues where the original design committee decided that we didn't really need to have the top navigation include the school board, for example. And that didn't really go over well, at least with those 12 people. So once the site went live, they were adamant that it had to change, and we had to change it, and we had to have the design changed. But I think that goes on everywhere, where everybody thinks that they have to be on the homepage because they're the most important part of the organization. So I think that's everywhere, though.
Question here and then up here.
curious about the functionality of the sites. Is it just public content, or is it also SIS kind of stuff, or parent to student communication?
It's really just public information. Now there are systems that you mentioned, like student information systems that the parents can get access to through the public website. There's information on how you get your account, how you log in, how you set your password, and so forth. But the actual access to the student information system is a separate standalone system. And there are several systems like that. Some just geared towards staff, like the where you can turn in the fact that you want to take vacation, or that you have been on leave, or you want to check your medical benefits. All those kinds of things you can get to from the public site, but they're all standalone systems. And Blackboard, the teacher-student classroom online, is not technically part of the system, but it's where everyone goes to get to Blackboard.
Through the content discovery, we also were able to bubble some of that stuff into a consistent place for everybody to be able to find it, so that it wasn't sitting buried too far down. It also wasn't, in a different spot at each school. It was always being consistent.
Yeah, fair question.
Yeah, so I was curious about the implementation time on this, and also I've worked in a similar environment, which tends to be very collaborative, and trying to make decisions, trying to push decisions. How did that work?
Well, fortunately, at the time that this project came about, we had new leadership who was very interested in getting this all done fast. And so based on that, we launched the site probably at least a couple weeks before we should have, on the day that teachers returned from summer vacation, which wasn't the best day. So, but it was done, and we were going along with the program. But it's taken a while since then, because of the schedule of the people who work in the schools, revolving around the students being there. So then in the summer, of course, they're off for a little while. And now that they're all back, we've been doing a lot of training to get as many more schools trained as we can.
So on concept to delivery, what was that time frame?
So the central site, which contains a lot of the, the information from, for example, instructional services, that's consistent throughout all the schools. So like the kindergarten curriculum and any kind of special education curriculum, HR, finance, all those central office sort of, that site was, we started working on it in, I would say, January for real, and then it went live in August of 2016. And now the schools are sort of a phased-in approach. We're doing them as they come along. But as of today, we should have about 50 who will be live, and then the other 150 are either in some state of migration or waiting to be trained.
So 8 months from start concept to implementation.
For the central office, yes.
Yeah, Nancy, you were saying to me this morning that by September you expect 75 or so schools to be up
Yes.
and running live. So that's 75 out of 190. So you're taking it in steps. And how long will it be till you think you have 100%?
We're hoping to have all of them by the end of school year 2018, so June 2018 is our general plan.
Great. Question up here and then down.
I'm curious about the Drupal 8. How did it fit in your project? What kind of challenges you had? How good is Drupal in your opinion? What are the areas of improvement? And why did you need the third party to have you for this project?
A third party for which part?
I think you mentioned Pantheon or something.
Oh, so Pantheon's the hosting platform.
Just hosting. Didn't they help you with the development?
DevOps, from a standpoint of, they take all the guesswork out of it, and we rely on their experience on a container-based architecture to be able to manage it. We have sysadmins, and me and Matt were talking about this morning. I mean, you could take on the challenge of trying to reinvent the wheel, but I'm a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel if there's already the experience in container-based architecture that you can turn to. And so I personally wouldn't take that venture on your own, because so much changes. So many things you're going to have to worry about from a system architecture, from a hosting. You spin this up on AWS, FedRAMP, GovCloud, on all the challenges that go with that, with FSMA and all the other stuff, especially if you're a government entity. But I rely on the experts to do that. Back to your initial question, though.
Yeah, talk about D8 versus D7.
Yeah. So why Drupal 8 versus Drupal 7? A lot of people, I think, probably still feel Drupal 8's scary, and Drupal 7's the safe answer. I would say that Drupal 8 is the better safe answer, and that Drupal 7 is not the way I would go anymore. And the reason being is because everything that you were dealing with in a Drupal 7 architecture with contributed modules that was worth using as a contributed module has more than likely been pulled into Drupal 8 core now. So instead of having to manage contributed modules, it's already managed for you from the security team, from the community. The challenge with Drupal 7, especially from a front-end architecture, is you were designing pages. You were taking the square peg and pounding it into the round hole of Page Manager, Panelizer, Display Suite, and relying on Drupal 7's markup, which you had very little control over unless you really wanted to go into TPL hell, which was the templating system in Drupal 7. Or you were forced to rely on the markup that the backend developer was handing to you as a front-end developer, and then modifying your CSS and stuff to put it back into the database where things really shouldn't be. Drupal 8 allows the front-end development team to work either parallel with the back-end development team or even ahead of the back-end development team, because we're designing systems now, not pages. So we're taking a componentized approach to design, which allows us to build front-end implementations of any type of creative designs we see much faster. The other big bonus with Drupal 8 is configuration. Everything can be pulled out of the database and actually put into code, so I have the ability to manage that inside of a code repository like GitHub. I can still manage development, staging, and production separate from one another in configuration now with the different tools that are in place for configuration management. On the flip side of that, though, you do have to learn or reteach yourself object-oriented PHP, because Drupal 8 did adopt Symfony. It did adopt things like Composer, so from a sysadmin architecture methodology has to change a little bit of being able to run things from a command line. Flip that again, though. To me, that makes it much easier, because now you're developing, if you're developing custom modules, you're developing in such a way that actually truly makes sense and fits into an architecture that technically the only thing that's changing at that point is the API. You should be able to take that code and plop it into Laravel, plop it into WordPress, plop it into a Symfony-based application. And so Drupal 8, with all its, as fast-moving as it is versus Drupal 7 and the item that took place, is a sane choice to build any new platform or any large-scale Drupal system that you're thinking about doing on without any hesitation. The tools out there, the education, the learning, the books, which I've written 2 now on, are out there, and the community is really strong in Drupal 8. So I'd say if you have any hesitation, don't. And if you need to if you have any more detailed questions, feel free to stop by the booth. I'll be more than happy to do a much deeper dive into what we did for FCTS and walk through some of the different really key decision points.
Sorry, not Drupal 7, but my perspective was like mostly to Drupal 9. What were your challenges with Drupal 8 and that kind of actually I was curious about that.
I'm confused on the question because you just mentioned Drupal 9, which I honestly very curious.
What kind of challenges you have with Drupal 8?
Drupal 8 from, I would say, start with things that are hard early, because things that you might take for granted, like Solar, like multilingual, like those are probably the two largest workbench moderation. If you're doing a type of content governance, things that were, because they've been around so long in Drupal 7, are easy to do. Aren't necessarily easy to do in Drupal 8 unless you've done it a couple of times. So I'd say take those larger things that you know are there, add about 10% on top of those, prioritize them, and tackle them early in your development process, because in Legal Tech Center Room, we ran into this challenge with multilingual, and this is a core bug right now with Drupal 8, where translation, workbench moderation, and revisions, the kind of the trifecta for any type of real true governance with localization, just doesn't work. There's 4 bugs that are currently out there that are still being addressed where nodes disappear if you have a translated version of it. And so we worked hand in hand with Lingotech early to really squash some of those challenges that we were running into. Whereas in Drupal 7, that issue wasn't there. And so that's something that you would have took for granted. Oh, I got this, I can do this in Drupal 7, turned into a huge effort in Drupal 8. I'd say, I think in the beginning, the Solar, Drupal 8 Solar requires technically a higher version of Solar to run with Search API Solar. Some of the things, architecture has changed a little bit, and while that's still not a production-ready module, it is out in the wild, and we are using it. So take into consideration some of those things, which again, easy in 7, you take it for granted. You think you're going to take it for granted for Drupal 8, not necessarily the 7. So that was probably the 2 big challenges that we ran into.
Matt, do you have any reflections on D8 versus 7?
Yeah, I think one thing to add that for projects where you're really looking to build something that will be expanded on and extended over the next few years, that Drupal 8 becomes a really good option because it's going to have a lot more of the updates and the additional features and the support going forward, next year, 2 years, 3 years. Drupal 7 is sort of nearing the end of its kind of run. Drupal 8 is definitely on acceleration. I think one big sort of challenge and thing that becomes a real strength when you get it right for a lot of these projects is making sure that you have a sort of maintainable and extendable code base. That doing some prototype work of some of the harder features up front, making sure you can figure out a way to make those sort of done right and can work in the future, really sets you up for success. Because for all the folks who have worked on projects, you realize, whatever you build on day 1 is not what you ultimately will have, a year from then or 2 years from then. And making sure you have that sort of system in place to be able to extend as you go and not have that sort of, make your whole site very brittle and difficult to work with is important. And I think Drupal 8 does a lot of things on a sort of architectural level to really help you with that. As Chaz mentioned, the configuration that you can store in YAML files using configuration management system in Drupal 8 is way cleaner and easier to use than features in some of the solutions in Drupal 7. And that the ability to have more functionality in core, which is some of the best maintained code in the Drupal ecosystem, instead of having a patchwork of dozens of contrib modules to get the same effect, will set you up a lot more for success because each version of Drupal 8 increases the features on those. There's a lot of testing and upgradability between that. And that you'll really look 3 years down the road and be very happy that you set yourself on a path to keep up to date with everything, instead of having to sort of go reinvent or jigger things to make it work in the future.
Yes.
Question here. Yes.
2 questions. Because of the separate federated sites, how do you push out security updates? Are they all same or are they different? Are there differences in the sites? That's the first question. Then the next question is documentation for the end users. What do you use for them?
Did you hear the question up there?
The first was on security, the second was on documentation. I don't like documentation, so I'm not going to answer that one. That's coming from a person that's written 2 books. So security, with this model, security updates are very easy. If you really break this down, think of the FCPS ecosystem as a central site and a single school site. Okay? When I run an update for central site, that is separate from a school site. So I'm going to take central out of the equation here for a second. So I have a central or a single school site that literally the 50 plus sites that are up now are just copies of that because of the fact that we're using an install profile. So everything comes from this core code base. So when a security update comes up, I am updating and testing against this single core code base, which is then is in a repository, which is then our upstream snapshot for the sake of Pantheon's platform. And so when I have tested that and make sure nothing breaks on that single instance, I'm pushing those changes up to the repo. Pantheon's listening, saying, hey, I have upstream changes. At that point, technically, I could use the platform and push updates to individual sites if I want. Obviously, as it grows, that's kind of an unmanageable process, so we use Terminus, which is a command line tool for the Pantheon platform, to be able to script out pushing this change, so that when I'm ready to push a security updates, push a feature update on the single school site, all I do is literally run a couple of command lines, and that pushes it out to everything. So it handles that feature set really easy. As far as documentation, what makes it very easy for Nancy and her team to be able to train the school sites is all the documentation was done against a single school site. And so the training is always consistent. The way that you upload a logo is the same across all the sites. The way that you choose your branding colors is the same across all sites. The way that you add content to the content types is the same across all the sites. The only real difference between all the school sites is the users, and for that we actually they have an active directory export that takes place each night, and then we pull that in and update and add and remove users across the school sites.
Thank you. Last questions. Let's hear your questions out, and then we'll give the panel one last time to respond. Up here and then down here. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the migration process?
Migration process. Content migration.
That was one of my questions. And I was just curious to understand a little bit in terms of your vision of how much autonomy these different sites have, because that seems like a key part of your decision.
Yeah. Question of how much autonomy to give.
The buy-in a little bit.
Great. Any other questions? We'll take those and then we'll wrap up.
Oh, so the migration for the schools, I'll just talk about the schools right now. The central site would be like any other agency where you just have people who work in offices who need to move their stuff. We used a couple tools that Forum One provided us with. One was called Gather Content, where you would sort of preliminarily put content where you wanted to end up and see how it was all going to work out and get rid of stuff you didn't need and that kind of thing. Now with the schools, it varies a lot by school how much content they really have. So for example, Robinson Secondary School has 3,500 students. They have, 350 staff members. They have a ton of content. So their migration is going to be much lengthier than, say, an elementary school that maybe only has basic content, maybe 20 pages worth of information. But what they're doing is pretty much deciding what content needs to move over. We have site maps, of course, that the Forum One provided us with, slightly different for elementary, middle, high, and secondary schools. And they sit down in training, and we go over what goes in which bucket and what they can add and what they don't have to add, what's required, what's optional, any other changes they can make, and what changes they can't make. And then we go through like a 3-hour training, either in person or we have videos as well. And they're free to make their content migrated as they need to.
But the migration was all done manually?
Yes.
You didn't try to do any automatic migration of content?
Right.
If you use Gather Content as your model, the nice thing about that tool, if you're not familiar with it, is it allows us to take, after we've done the content discovery, we've created the content types. We take those content types and those fields and actually map them out into Gather Content so that they can start the a pseudo content migration process early. But there's also tools with Drupal to be able to actually connect to Gather Content and running a migration process, pull that actually into Drupal if you're dealing with a lot of content and it doesn't require a lot of massaging from the individual schools in this case. So with the SCPS approach, it was we migrated 250 pieces of content, and everything else from there was manually when migrated. So.
Good. And
there was an autonomy question.
Last question about how much autonomy you give the individual schools. Nancy, how did you approach that?
In the initial design, they have complete control over what's in their full menu. The top navigation is supposed to remain the same, but they can change it. We're recommending that they not change it because usually what they do is add more things, and then it messes up the design of it. So, but some of the schools have to. Like there are a number of special education centers and alternative schools that don't have all the same content that a typical elementary, middle, or high school would have. So it is it is possible for them to change it, but we're recommending that they not do that.
Is that something that you as a developer to do, or is this more inside the system?
The changing of the top navigation, they can do that themselves. We don't bring that up in training though, but some of them have figured it out still.
Don't tweet that out. Great, well, staying on schedule, we're going to wrap it up. Certainly come on down and chat with our panel if you'd like to hear more. And just, Chaz is leading a training that's going to be tomorrow 8 to 5 here on component-based theming with Twig. It might be sold out, but there might be a waiting list if you want to learn more in the technical details of some of this. Thanks for coming.